The history of Spain is filled with blood, betrayal, and whispers of forbidden passions. Yet among all the tales that echo through the dusty halls of forgotten palaces, few can compare to the macabre legend of Queen Joanna of Castile, better known to history as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Her life was a storm of passion and despair, of love that refused to die, even when flesh had turned to dust. Some have claimed that Juana did not merely weep at her husband's grave, nor guard his body out of sorrow, but that she descended into the darkest chambers of obsession. She slept beside his corpse, clung to it as if it still breathed, and kept him with her long after worms had begun their feast. But to understand how a queen, once one of the most powerful women in Europe, came to be remembered as a deranged widow wandering with a coffin, we must go back to the heart of Spain at the dawn of the 16th century. Juana was the daughter of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the very monarchs who united Spain under one crown and completed the Reconquista, expelling the last Moorish rulers from Granada. From birth, Juana was destined for greatness, not through love but through politics. She was married at 16 to Philip of Habsburg, called Philip the Handsome, son of the Holy Roman Emperor. It was a match forged to strengthen the bond between Spain and the vast empire of the Habsburgs. At first glance, the union appeared ideal. Philip was admired throughout Europe for his beauty, charm, and skill in courtly manners. Juana, though overshadowed by her famous parents and her elder siblings, was intelligent, sensitive, and deeply devout. What began as a marriage of political necessity quickly turned into an all-consuming passion, at least for Juana. She loved Philip with a fervor that bordered on the unnatural, a fire that would never be extinguished even when death claimed him. Yet their marriage was far from harmonious. Philip's beauty was matched only by his vanity and unfaithfulness. He surrounded himself with mistresses and courtiers who delighted in mocking Juana's jealousy. The young queen's devotion became a weapon against her. The more she clung to Philip, the more he pushed her away. Chroniclers speak of scenes of madness in the palace, with Juana attacking her husband's lovers, dragging women by the hair, and screaming into the night. Whether these accounts were exaggerated by enemies eager to discredit her, or whether they were signs of a true illness, is still debated. What is certain is that Juana's love was not reciprocated. Philip enjoyed her beauty when it suited him, but he sought his pleasures elsewhere. And yet, for Juana, there was no life without him. Her soul was chained to his, and she would not allow even death to sever those chains. In 1506, tragedy struck. Philip fell suddenly ill. Some say poisoned. Others say stricken by fever. He was only 28. Juana, then just 26 years old, was left a widow. The kingdom fell into chaos. Spain, already restless under the joint rule of her parents, looked to Juana as the rightful queen. But she was not strong in politics. She was strong only in her passion for her husband. And so, instead of taking the throne with authority, she took his body, and refused to let it go. The chronicles tell us that after Philip's death, Juana ordered his body embalmed and placed in a lead-lined coffin. But this was not the end of her mourning. She refused to bury him, claiming that she could not part from him. She carried the coffin with her wherever she went, guarded day and night by soldiers. She would open it at times, gazing upon the decaying remains, whispering words of devotion, stroking the cold flesh of her beloved. Some claimed that Juana even lay beside the coffin at night, as if the man within it still lived. The darkest of whispers said she went further, that she embraced the corpse itself, unwilling to admit that the warmth had fled from it forever. Whether these rumors were born of truth, or of enemies eager to brand her as insane, remains uncertain. But they were enough to stain her name in history. Joanna the Mad, the queen who slept with her husband's mummy. But this story is not merely one of a grieving widow. It is a story of conspiracies, of a kingdom eager to silence a queen who might have ruled in her own right. For behind the legend of Juana's madness lay a deeper truth, that those around her, her father, her son, and the powerful nobles of Spain, had every reason to paint her as unfit to rule. Her father, Ferdinand, wasted no time in exploiting her grief. With Philip dead, Ferdinand sought to regain control over Castile, claiming that his daughter was too unstable to govern. He spread tales of her obsession with the corpse, fueling the rumors that she was mad. And when Ferdinand himself died, her son, the future Emperor Charles V, would continue the same policy, keeping his mother confined in the fortress of Tordesillas for more than 40 years. But was Juana truly insane, or was she the victim of one of the most sinister conspiracies in Spanish history? Did she truly share her bed with her husband's embalmed body, or was this grotesque tale invented to strip her of power? The line between truth and slander is blurred, and in that shadow the legend took root. The coffin of Philip traveled with Juana across the cold landscapes of Castile. At night, when the soldiers rested, she demanded that torches be lit so that his body was never left in darkness. She forbade women from approaching the coffin, jealous even of the dead. And yet, as grotesque as these actions seemed, they can also be read as the desperate clinging of a woman robbed of love, imprisoned by her own devotion, and betrayed by those who should have stood beside her. Thus begins the tale of the Spanish queen who would not release her husband, even to the grave. A tale of madness or perhaps of manipulation. A tale where passion becomes obsession, and where truth is twisted into legend. And as we peel back the layers of this dark history, we will uncover not only the secrets of Juana's heart, but the conspiracies that reshaped Spain itself. The night after Philip's death in 1506, Castile trembled. In Valladolid, the palace halls echoed with whispers. What now? The young queen had the crown by right, yet she was inconsolable, locked in her chamber with the coffin of her beloved. Courtiers approached cautiously, fearing her rage and her despair. Some heard her singing lullabies to the corpse, as if Philip only slept. Others swore they saw her lips press against his cold mouth. What was grief and what was madness? None could tell. But while Juana wept, others plotted. For grief in a queen was not merely a private torment. It was a threat to the stability of kingdoms. Power hates a vacuum, and Spain was too important a prize to be left in the hands of a broken widow. Her father, King Ferdinand of Aragon, was the first to act. He had ruled beside Isabella with iron resolve, and after her death he dreamed of keeping Castile in his grip. But Juana stood between him and power. She was the rightful queen of Castile, and even though she had never been trained to rule, her blood alone gave her authority greater than his. The solution, then, was simple: to declare her unfit. And what better excuse than the spectacle of a woman who refused to bury her dead husband? The rumors began to spread with unnatural speed. It was whispered that Juana never left the coffin, that she lay beside it as if it were her marriage bed. Priests who had attended her claimed that she demanded nightly prayers for the soul of Philip while caressing the corpse. Soldiers spoke of how she forbade any woman to look upon him, lest he be seduced even in death. These stories spread like wildfire, not only across Castile, but throughout Europe. Soon all the courts of Christendom spoke of the Queen of Spain who was possessed by morbid passion. But was it truth, or was it a carefully woven net of lies? Ferdinand understood well the power of rumor. In the 16th century, when most of the populace could not read, the spoken word was more dangerous than swords. And every tale of Juana's madness weakened her claim, making it easier for her father to present himself as the only man capable of ruling Castile. Yet Juana still clung to the coffin. She ordered it to be taken from city to city, always guarded, always sealed, and always near her. When she traveled through the countryside, peasants gathered to watch the bizarre procession. Soldiers, priests, royal banners, and at the center, the silent lead casket that contained the body of Philip the Handsome. To them it seemed like a cursed pilgrimage, a queen leading the remains of a king through the heart of Spain. Some believed she had lost her mind to grief. Others whispered that she had been bewitched. The church, too, began to look upon her with suspicion. Grief was natural, but obsession with the dead bordered on heresy. Priests questioned whether Juana had allowed her despair to open a door to demonic influence. In sermons, whispers turned into accusations. Was the queen not only mad, but possessed? All the while, Ferdinand pulled the strings. With each story of Juana's strange behavior, he strengthened his claim. He declared before the Cortes that his daughter was incapable of ruling, that she was enslaved by her passion and unfit to govern. Few dared to oppose him. After all, the sight of a queen traveling with a coffin spoke louder than words. But not all accepted the tale so easily. There were those who suspected that Ferdinand was deliberately exaggerating Juana's grief, perhaps even imprisoning her to ensure that she appeared more unstable than she truly was. Records tell us that when Juana tried to assert herself as queen, her father's men silenced her, refusing her commands. Every attempt at sovereignty was twisted into another sign of madness. When she protested, she was hysterical. When she resisted, she was insane. And yet, Juana's obsession with Philip cannot be entirely dismissed as invention. Some of her acts are too well documented to ignore. She truly did keep his coffin with her. She truly did forbid women from approaching it. She truly did wander at night, ordering the coffin to be opened so she could look upon her husband's face, even as it decayed. One chronicler described the stench of corruption rising from the body, yet still she lingered beside it. Was this madness, or was it a symbol? A grotesque declaration that no man, not even her father, could separate her from the king she had loved? By 1509, Ferdinand's plans were complete. Juana, though queen in name, was a prisoner in reality. She was sent to the fortress of Tordesillas, where she would remain for decades. Her coffin, however, did not stay. Philip was finally buried in Granada, though whether Juana allowed it willingly or whether the act was forced upon her is a matter of debate. Some chroniclers claim that she was tricked into leaving the coffin, told that it would be placed in a chapel for safekeeping. When she later asked to see it, the guards refused. From that day forward, her life became a cage of stone and shadow. Yet the conspiracies did not end with Ferdinand. When he died in 1516, the crown passed to Juana's son, Charles, soon to be Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. Like his grandfather, Charles had no intention of allowing Juana to rule. Though she was technically queen, he kept her locked in Tordesillas, visited only rarely, and presented to the public only when necessary. Here, the legend grew darker still. For if Ferdinand had painted Juana as mad, Charles ensured that the portrait could never be erased. He maintained strict control over her, surrounding her with guards who reported every word she spoke. If she prayed too long, they called it lunacy. If she raged at her imprisonment, they called it hysteria. Even her moments of silence were described as unnatural. In this way, the myth of Joanna the Mad became eternal. But beneath the layers of rumor and manipulation lies the haunting image of a woman whose love defied death itself. Was her devotion to Philip truly madness? Or was it a desperate attempt to cling to the only man she had ever loved, in a world that sought to strip her of everything else? The truth lies hidden between the lines of history. Yet one thing is certain, Juana was more than a grieving widow. She was a queen betrayed by her family, used as a pawn in the great chessboard of European politics, and remembered not for her rights or her lineage, but for the coffin she carried through the night. And in the fortress of Tordesillas, as the years turned into decades, Juana's legend only grew. They said she still spoke to Philip in whispers, even when his body was long buried. They said she kissed the air as if his lips hovered before her. They said she was both prisoner and ghost, haunted by a love too powerful to die. Thus the conspiracies of her father and her son buried her alive. But in that silence, in that darkness, Juana la Loca became immortal, not as a ruler, but as the queen who loved beyond the grave. The fortress of Tordesillas stood on a hill above the Duero River, a grim silhouette against the Castilian sky. Its stone walls were thick, its gates heavy with iron, its corridors narrow and cold. It was not a palace for a queen, it was a tomb for the living. And it was here that Juana of Castile would remain for the rest of her life. When she first arrived in 1509, escorted under guard, Juana still bore the title of Queen of Castile. On paper, she reigned. In truth, she was already a prisoner. Her father Ferdinand justified it by claiming she was too unstable to govern. Later, her son Charles would repeat the same argument. Both men had their ambitions secured by her silence. At first, Juana resisted. She demanded to see Philip's coffin, begged that it be returned to her. When the guards refused, she screamed and raged, tearing at her clothes, pulling her hair, and calling upon God to strike her captors dead. Chroniclers recorded these outbursts with delight, for they were proof of her madness. But one must ask, was it madness, or the desperate cry of a woman betrayed by her own blood? Her chambers in Tordesillas were sparse. She was given only a bed, a few tapestries, and a crucifix. The windows were barred, the doors locked at night. Her ladies-in-waiting were carefully chosen to report every word she spoke. The guards never left her alone, and yet she was always lonely. Her children were kept away, save for rare visits, and when they came, they were strangers to her, taught to fear their mother's supposed insanity. In this bleak solitude, Juana's grief twisted into obsession. Some nights she refused to eat, claiming that she would join Philip in death. Other times she burst into wild laughter, as if hearing his voice. The priests who tended to her soul reported that she often prayed for hours, whispering to the crucifix, then suddenly turning and speaking to the shadows, as though her husband's spirit stood beside her. The people of Castile, however, did not forget her. From the villages near Tordesillas, peasants would climb the hill and gaze at the fortress, whispering tales of the imprisoned queen. They said she walked the halls at night like a phantom, dragging invisible chains. Some claimed they heard her singing lullabies to the darkness, her voice echoing through the stone corridors. To them, she was both tragic and terrifying. A ruler denied her throne, transformed into a ghost while still alive. The years passed, and with them came new humiliations. Her son Charles, now Holy Roman Emperor, visited her on occasion. But his purpose was not affection, it was to remind her of her captivity. He entered her chambers surrounded by guards, speaking to her not as a son to a mother, but as a ruler to a prisoner. Juana begged him to release her, to let her rule as God had ordained, but Charles only smiled coldly and reminded her of her illness. To the outside world, he declared her too deranged to govern, though he never allowed her a chance to prove otherwise. And so the cycle of rumor continued. Whenever Juana resisted, her captors told the world that she was hysterical. Whenever she fell into silence, they said she was sunk into madness. There was no escape. Every breath she took became evidence of her instability. Some accounts tell us that Juana's treatment grew harsher with time. Guards were ordered not to speak with her except when absolutely necessary. Her food was often plain, sometimes spoiled, as if to remind her that she no longer lived as a queen. In the cold winters, her chambers were left unheated. At times she was confined for weeks in near darkness, her only company the rats that crept through the stone cracks. It is said that in these years her obsession with Philip returned in full force. Though his body had long been buried in Granada, Juana insisted that he still visited her. She spoke of his touch, of his words, of his promises. The guards reported that she kissed the empty air before she slept, murmuring his name as though he lay beside her. Whether this was true delusion, or whether it was the cruel fantasy of a heart broken beyond repair, none can say. Yet one detail remained consistent in every account. Juana never forgot her husband. Even when her body grew frail, even when her hair turned gray, she clung to the memory of Philip as if it were more real than the stone walls that imprisoned her. Her love was both her torment and her defiance. For in keeping Philip alive in her mind, she denied the power of those who had stolen everything else from her. The villagers around Tordesillas carried the stories far and wide. They spoke of the queen who still lived with her dead husband, who refused to let him go even in spirit. Priests used her tale as a warning of sinful passion, claiming that her unnatural love had driven her into the arms of demons. But among the common people, she became something else. A figure of sorrow, a woman cursed by fate, a queen who had been betrayed by her own family and imprisoned for her love. As decades passed, Juana's imprisonment became not merely a political act, but a ritual of cruelty. Spain changed around her. Her son Charles fought wars across Europe, crowned himself emperor, and ruled half the known world. Her grandson Philip II rose to power. Yet through all these changes, Juana remained locked in her chamber, forgotten, a living relic of a past no one dared to resurrect. And still, the legend grew. Travelers passing near Tordesillas whispered that they saw a pale face at the barred window, watching them. Some swore that her voice carried across the river at night, calling for Philip. Others believed she had become immortal, sustained only by her obsession. And always, at the heart of the story, was the same grotesque image. The queen who slept with her husband's mummy, who loved the dead as if they still lived. But what was the truth? Did Juana truly descend into madness? Or was she merely a woman destroyed by grief and by politics? The answer is hidden beneath centuries of rumor, each account shaped by those who benefited from her silence. What we know for certain is this. Juana lived over 40 years in captivity, denied her throne, denied her freedom, denied even the dignity of her grief. The fortress of Tordesillas did not merely confine her body, consumed her soul. And as her world shrank to a single chamber, Juana la Loca became more legend than woman. A queen remembered not for her reign, but for the coffin she would not surrender, and the love that outlived reason itself. For more than 4 decades, the fortress of Tordesillas had held its most famous prisoner. Joanna of Castile, once the daughter of the Catholic Monarchs, once the bride of Philip the Handsome, and once the rightful queen of a united Spain, had been reduced to a shadow behind stone walls. Her beauty had long faded, her youth stolen by grief and confinement. Yet still she endured. By the 1550s, Juana was an old woman. Her hair was white, her body frail, her eyes clouded by years of tears. She could barely walk, and her health had deteriorated so badly that she was often bedridden. But her mind, though clouded by sorrow and perhaps by illness, still clung stubbornly to the memory of her husband. In whispers she still spoke to Philip, calling him by name, swearing that he had not left her. To her jailers, this was proof of madness. But to Juana, it was proof of love. The people of Spain had not forgotten her. From time to time, rumors of the imprisoned queen surfaced again. Pilgrims passing through Tordesillas claimed they heard her weeping through the walls. Some swore that when they prayed at the nearby church, they saw her thin silhouette in the tower window, staring toward the horizon, as if waiting for someone who never came. Mothers told their children that Juana wandered the corridors at night, carrying an invisible coffin in her arms. She was no longer merely a queen. She had become a living ghost. And then, in the spring of 1555, the long captivity came to an end. Juana fell gravely ill, weakened by fever and neglect. Her jailers, accustomed to her endless suffering, did little to ease her pain. The priests came to administer the last rites, speaking to her of Christ and salvation. But Juana, even on her deathbed, spoke only of Philip. Witnesses claimed her final words were whispered to the shadows beside her bed, as though she saw her husband waiting to guide her into the next world. On April 12, 1555, Juana died in her chamber at Tordesillas. She was 75 years old. For most of her life she had been queen in name but a prisoner in truth. Her reign had lasted nearly half a century, and yet she had never truly ruled. The crown that was hers by right had been worn by her father, then by her son, and then by her grandson. Spain had risen to be one of the greatest empires on earth, yet its rightful queen had withered in a cage. After her death, her body was taken to Granada, to be buried beside Philip in the royal chapel. At last, the lovers who had been separated in life were reunited in death. Yet the irony was cruel. The woman who had clung so desperately to his coffin was only allowed to rest beside him when she no longer had breath to protest. But death did not end Juana's story. In fact, it was in death that her legend began to grow darker still. The tales of her obsession with Philip became twisted into ever more grotesque forms. Chroniclers wrote that she had not merely kept his body near her, but that she had embraced it, kissed it, and even lain with it as if it were alive. Some claimed that she had demanded the coffin be opened regularly, so she could touch the cold flesh within. Others said that she slept with the coffin in her bed, refusing to allow anyone to move it. Whether these stories were truth or slander no longer mattered. They spread across Europe, becoming part of the macabre folklore of Spain. To some, Juana was a cautionary tale of excessive love. a woman so consumed by passion that it turned into madness. To others, she was a victim, her story proof of how politics could destroy even a queen. But to all, she was unforgettable. Historians now believe that much of Juana's madness was exaggerated, if not outright fabricated. Her grief was real, her obsession perhaps genuine, but the darkest tales were almost certainly spread by her enemies. By branding her as insane, her father and her son had secured their power. The image of the necrophiliac queen, sleeping with her husband's mummy, served their purposes well. It ensured that no one would ever trust her with a throne. Yet legends have a life of their own, and Juana's became one of the most enduring in Spanish history. In plays, poems, and paintings, she was depicted as the Mad Widow, wandering through the night with her husband's coffin. The coffin itself became a symbol of love, of madness, and of betrayal. Even today, when one enters the Royal Chapel of Granada and sees the tombs of Juana and Philip lying side by side, the air seems heavy with irony. Here lies the woman who could never let go, imprisoned for her grief, remembered not as the daughter of Isabella the Catholic, not as the mother of Charles V, but as Juana la Loca, the queen who loved the dead. Her life raises questions that history can never fully answer. Was she truly insane? Or was she the victim of a calculated conspiracy? Did she truly embrace Philip's corpse? Or was this a monstrous slander invented by men who wished to silence her? The truth is lost in the mists of time, buried beneath layers of rumor and propaganda. But perhaps, in the end, the truth does not matter. For Juana's tragedy lies not only in whether she was mad or sane, but in the fact that she was denied the chance to live as either. She was not allowed to be a queen, nor allowed to be a grieving widow. Instead, she became a legend shaped by others, a story told not in her own voice, but in the whispers of those who feared her power. And so the story of Juana of Castile remains one of the most haunting in European history. A queen who was turned into a prisoner, a wife who was branded as a madwoman, and a woman whose love was remembered as something monstrous. Her coffin, her grief, her whispered words to the dead, these became her legacy. Perhaps she was mad. Perhaps she was sane. Perhaps she was both. But one thing is certain. Juana la Loca never truly died. For her ghost still walks the corridors of Tordesillas, carrying an invisible coffin in her arms, forever seeking the husband she could never release.